How is classical education different from what we have been doing, from the progressive everything? And you just confidently say to them, well, we turn from technology to real paper, real pencils, and real books.
Welcome to Classical Etc., a show from Memoria Press that dives into the philosophy, culture, and heart of classical education. You're in the studio with Memoria Press.
Welcome to Classical Etc. Today we're going to be talking about transitioning a school to a classical model. But before we get there, I am not your host permanently. I am standing in for today, and so we'll see how this goes. So
we'll let you know how you do.
Who
are you?
Okay.
In case people aren't watching.
That's right. I am Paul Schaefer. I'm here with Tanya Charlton, Martin Cothran, and our special guest, Kathy Becker, who has been with Memoria Press for how many years?
I think this is my 7th year.
7th year.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't seem that long.
Yes, Kathy does not work in the office, so she is not a regular podcast guest.
Well, she works in the office, but remotely on a TV.
I work on the wall.
Yes, she's in the screen on the wall.
Yes.
Every day. But we need to start with, lest we break good habits. Martin, what are you reading?
I am reading Ian Toll's The Conquering Tide, the second book in his 3-volume series on the war in the Pacific in World War II.
Oh.
And it is fascinating. I don't know if I've said this before on the show, so stop me if I have. But with the war literature that we have in English is really stunning. And there are some masterpieces. A lot of this writing is really, really good narrative writing. Mm-hmm. And so, history should be that way anyway, right? It should be good narrative writing. And Ian Toll's is one of the best. And so he tells the story so well. And it's so interesting in the way he does it because it's this vast, the Pacific, it's this huge area. And the Japanese come in basically in a matter of a week, take the whole thing over. And here we are, and we're fighting Germany, helping to fight Germany already. And we have this whole other war to handle in the Pacific, and it's this vast thing. And so there's all these great battles, and he just tells a really, really good story.
And we don't usually see the war from the Pacific viewpoint, where it's more the other side. Have you read The Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larson?
No, I haven't.
It's really good about World War II. It's actually just 1 year in Churchill's being prime minister. It's just that one. It's just a very short time period that it covers, but it's a lot happens.
Yeah. Well, I was giving a talk in Canada recently, and I can't remember exactly what I was talking about, but I was remembering the books. Well, I was talking about boredom and the importance of boredom and how we read when we were kids because we had nothing else to do, right? And there was only a few books around. My house did not have a big library. We had the World Book Encyclopedia. And then my mother had bought this illustrated, Reader's Digest illustrated history of World War II. Oh. And I wore that out. And so I had maps and everything, so I know where everything happened. I got a good lay of the land, which makes reading a book like this all that
way easier. Sure. Yeah, because I was thinking about when you mentioned it, that you assuredly you had a general idea of the big
you really
picture,
need that.
And yet you're still going in and reading more about it because you're going to find out nuggets of things you don't know.
Well, my generation, we knew World War II. Of all the war, that was the war for us. It was World War II. And it's so weird to see that kind of receding into the distant past because I don't know that young people, I don't think know much about World War II.
Well, and they don't have the same kind of context because we have grown up with people who fought in World War II.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and so we're losing that as those people are dying.
Right.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see, in 20, 30 years, how we look back at, because even looking back at Vietnam, but looking back at like the wars in the Middle East, I don't get the impression that there are these significant battles in the way that there were
that are named.
That are named, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Maybe that comes later.
I think there are, but I think part of the allure of World War II was it was one of the last heroic wars.
Mm-hmm.
Look at the way we treat the Vietnam War, and just go look at the monument in Washington, and it's this dark, dreary thing in a way. It's kind of underground, and there's no statues. And you look at the celebrations of World War II in stone, and they're heroic, and we don't have that about all these other wars much.
I even think of my own father fighting in World War II and the stories. And just the other day, I was looking at a map, and I was looking at Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, and here's Tunisia. And he was in Tunisia.
Mm-hmm.
And he was dropping bombs. He was in the back of the plane, the tail bomber. And I remember him one time, he never spoke much about it, but these were the heroes of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he remembered flying over that whole area. He was Italian, and thinking of saving Italy. That is a different mindset than you will see today at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the goals are often different.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Yep. Kathy, what have you been reading?
I am reading a book by Joseph Epstein. Actually was directed to him. I think I heard Martin say something about him.
I'm sure it was Martin.
Or I don't know. And I read an essay and he was talking about why he doesn't listen to books on audio, which was interesting. But anyway, I started to read more about him, and I ordered this book of his. It's called The Elusive Enchantment of Charm. And the whole book is about being charming. And how does that come about? And can you learn that? Are you naturally charming? It's a great thought. It's a great thought. A charming person likes people and wants them to like themselves. And, they just walk into the room and they are charming. And in our society in these days, people sometimes aren't quite as charming as they used to be. And he talks about even the old movies, Myrna Loy, the different actresses. They were charming in their roles. And that is what drew people to those movies. It was a time of just being an enjoyable, charming person.
Well, you went to more social events back then. Yeah. Now we're all, talking at each other online or something. There's not as many social events anymore.
Mm-hmm.
There once were.
Yep.
You had to be more personally charming. And it's hard to be charming except if it's in person, right?
Truth. Oh, very true.
And I feel if there's one person at this table that would be reading about etiquette and charm, it would be you.
Wow.
That feels appropriate.
Very nice, Paul. Yeah. I appreciate that.
It's charming.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. It just exudes.
Okay, I'm coming back.
Tanya?
Well, David Copperfield is 900 pages. I'm still reading it, and I'm waiting to pick up War and Peace again until we've had the discussion about Volume 1, and then I'll move straight into Volume 2, which is that next. It's soon, right?
It's in 2 weeks, I think.
Okay, so I just thought I should wait.
Because I'm only like 30 pages into Volume 1.
Well, you better get with it. It's 300 pages. So I don't know, after Copperfield, I've only got a couple hundred pages left. But I tell you, that one is the one that's autobiographical. And I hadn't read it since I was in college when I really didn't appreciate it. And I really love it. I always said Bleak House was my favorite. Then I really loved Little Dorrit, but I think this may become my favorite. I just love that. And I'm not big usually on first-person narrative, but in this case, he is charming me. I am really enjoying this book more than I thought I was going to.
I remember that one being hard for me.
So much. It's so good.
Speaking of Dickens and being hard, I was just going to try to throw some hope to our listeners and say, Tanya talks how much she loves Dickens. You love Dickens. I struggle with Dickens. Other than A Tale of Two Cities, I really struggle with Dickens.
You think he's boring?
Why? Yeah,
he's
what is
too
it?
wordy. It's
the heart. Well, yeah, of course.
His books are big,
like in a serial form for magazines.
Right. A lot of his books were serial.
Why a lot of those I think are so long. But if you can, you need to be psychologically prepared to read Dickens, and you need to know and just have it in your mind that it's going to take a while to get into the story. It will take
because there's so many characters.
It took me a third of the book to really start enjoying it,
right?
Because he's setting things.
There are
up,
a lot of
he
characters.
Takes his time to do that.
Yes, and the characters are all caricatures, and
right.
so you just have to really appreciate that style.
Mm-hmm.
And they're all their names are caricatures, but my biggest thing is why that band Uriah Heep named themselves Uriah Heep. He's such
I think I would be willing to say that 98% of our audience does not remember that band. I remember.
I remember him very much. Yes.
I didn't know they were that popular.
He is such a nasty character. I just don't know why you would name your band Uriah Heep. Well, maybe they never read the book.
They were a rock and roll band, so maybe
metal,
nasty titles were.
But what happened to your red and black book you were reading that none of us had ever?
I'm still, but
is it worth reading?
Well, I just got through like half the very, very, very long first chapter. So I'll be talking about that in the future. It's a book about the French town and the French countryside. So,
okay, it's fiction, right?
Mm-hmm. It's one of the great novels.
Paul, are you reading anything?
I am. I am reading, I hate to admit this, but Madame Bovary.
Oh, are you?
Really?
And I have always seen it on, like, I mean, if you go to the library and you look for classic literature, it's going to be on the list, you know, and I have a vague recollection that it used to be on like the banned book list of the Catholic Church.
It was on the banned book list, and it is still
I think
probably
in France,
on banned books list.
And so I did not have great hopes for it, and I think my expectations are being borne out.
I read it in college.
It's one of the first modern novels, really.
Yeah, it's credited as for ushering realism into literature.
Yeah.
And so it's like, we've gone from talking about going from heroes to sort of this dark place. That's exactly what we've done. We've and instead of edifying us, now all of a sudden we're just down here in the dung heap.
It's the progressive thought of we must be very real, and in our realness, sometimes there's not goodness.
Right, and I was actually contrasting it because it's all about adulterous relationships, and I was contrasting it with Anna Karenina because the main character is about an adulterous relationship, but you have the counterpoint of Levin and Kitty that is showing you
have a meta narrative.
Are you not having Madame Bovary doesn't have any positive at all?
Not that I have yet found.
Maybe it'll come.
There are no lessons in there, really.
In Madame Bovary. It's been so long since I read it, I can't remember.
Well, and I went and read the synopsis of the whole book so I understand where I'm going because I'm looking for some hope. And when I read the synopsis, I'm like, there's no hope.
Maybe there's one character in there that will elicit some kind of hope.
We'll see. But speaking of hope, Kathy, you've been working years and years helping schools transition to classical.
Yes.
So, and all of us have been involved.
And she did it herself before she even came to work for us. She transitioned to school.
That's right. Do you want to kind of tell us maybe like the biggest challenge that you had in that?
I think so. I walked into a school that everybody loved Jesus, but they had a total mess of a curriculum. And I could see that they needed a classical curriculum because it's, as Memoria Press, our curriculum, cohesive, complete, connected. So important that the curriculum builds foundationally, that you know where you're going. And so I work with schools now and worked with that school at the time to begin that transition to a classical curriculum. That was when I met Paul. He trained my teachers. And as I've seen with other schools that I work with now, there are a lot of schools that are making the transition. I think probably the starting point for a school is going to be educating your teachers and educating your parents. And we don't want to do it all at once and be overwhelmed. Often I will recommend to schools, okay, first year in, let's do ELA courses. So basically, we're starting with phonics for the younger grades, spelling, literature, Latin, and writing. First year.
I love how you include Latin and English language arts.
Yes. Oh, definitely. Yes. So, if you do more than that, you're overwhelming your teachers, you're overwhelming the students, you're overwhelming your parents. So we just want to walk in at that pace. I mean, that's a lot if you think about that.
It is a lot. Paul and I have been part of a school transitioning everything.
Yeah.
And it was rough.
It's overwhelming.
It was very rough on the teachers, especially, to be handed every single thing brand new. And they didn't know what classical education was, so they hadn't really bought in.
Right.
At the time, they were just told you have to change your curriculum. Now, they have bought in, and it is beautiful now, but it was a rough couple of years.
Yeah, I think it's always surprised me that sometimes when a school is told we are becoming classical, it strikes fear in their heart. And
you
can't blame them really.
Right.
I mean, in
That's
many
right.
ways, because they don't know what that means.
It's something foreign.
It's something foreign. They're going to have to change what they do. They've been doing this for a long
and the way their
time.
classrooms look.
Yeah.
I mean, for us,
Absolutely.
it's like get those paper lanterns down off the ceiling.
Get that bunk bed out of there.
That's right.
Bunk bed.
Get those kids off those
They
bean
got
bags.
those, like lofts with comfortable place for
Their
kids to
little
go
reading
read.
spot.
Oh, yes. We've seen, oh my goodness. And then there was one that had a bathtub in the classroom, and the student reader got to sit in the bathtub and read. What is the point of that?
What is the point of that?
I mean, just, we've seen some things.
But they're clean. That's the
They're clean.
Yeah.
Yes.
The bathtubs are clean.
No, the children are clean
children,
because they're using the bathtub.
Well, so Martin, you've gone and you're sometimes part of the sort of the first wave when an administrator says we want to go classical, and I need to sort of garner some excitement about this. What's like the main thing that you go into those meetings or talks, speeches with that you want to communicate to the teachers and parents?
The very first thing I do is send them to Kathy. I remember when we first met. Do you remember when that was?
Maybe it was at AFI in Arizona. I don't remember.
Well, no, it was the ACC, the Association of Classical Christian Schools Conference.
Yes,
and here,
it was.
She comes into the booth, and I think you have some of your teachers with her, and she's ordering them around. I said, "This lady is in charge." Well, what I was going to say when you were talking is to do something like that to transition to school. You need a strong personality.
You do.
I mean, not everybody can do this. You need somebody who is a strong personality, who
believes it,
who knows it. I was going to say knows it and believes it. And if you don't have those two things, I think it's a dicey proposition.
It is.
It really is.
Because you're going to get pushback. You're going to get pushback from teachers. You're going to get pushback from parents. Because it becomes more academic and more rigorous. And Paul and I went to a school once because the parents thought it was too hard.
Oh, yes.
And so we went and talked to the board, which was made up of parents. And we were supposed to convince them that classical education was worth doing. And so, but in the course of the conversation, when the parents were talking about, how hard the homework was and how hard their children were having to work, somehow we convinced them.
Well, we offered, because we had just come out with the standard pathway, and we said, well, we started you on what we're now calling our accelerated pathway because it's all we had at the time. So we can move you to the standard pathway and slow it all down by a year.
And we were giving them all these plans for how they could make it more doable. And then they were all like, no, we don't want to change. This is what we want for our children. We want them to work hard.
Well, yeah.
Okay.
There's so many factors.
It was almost like they had broken through. Like it was 6 months after they'd been doing it for 6 months, and they kind of broken through and said, "Oh, like we can do this. Like we want to complain about it, but we can do this."
Right. And they didn't want it taken away.
Right.
At that point, because they saw what their children were doing that they had not been doing.
Right. That the students were now.
Yes.
The students are the proof.
Yeah.
That it works.
Yeah, and I mean, you asked me about mine, because I started out.
You mean before you started reminiscing about meeting Kathy?
Yes. Many years before I met Kathy.
Did you have a life before then?
It was pitiful before that. And My very first education act was to start a school. I mean, I had not taught. We started from absolute ground zero. And we built a cottage school, one day a week cottage school, which still exists to this day. It was founded in 1994. And we were really flying by the seat of our pants. And of course, I knew Cheryl at this time, and we were commiserating on the very early years.
The state of education in Kentucky.
Well, you're right, yeah. But I mean, we were talking about, she was giving me books to read. I was giving her books to read. We were really, at that point, really just figuring things out. And so we started this school. We ended up with over 100 kids at this school. From 7th grade. We started in 7th grade and we went up to high school. And so that was my really first experience in education. And then when Cheryl started Highlands Latin School, then we started in there. And so those are really my only really involved 2 experiences in starting a school. And that's not transitioning. I run into very few cases of a school really changing. We've got one here in Kentucky that we've worked with too, and I probably need to get an update from you about that school. But it is a hard thing to do, and you really do need somebody who knows what they're doing and who is willing to bite the bullet and just do it. Because I think once you do that, we all know this. I mean, right? That once parents see it, they understand. They can't understand it without seeing it. They got to see it first, and yet you can't have it until you start doing it. So it's hard.
Yeah, and I think that distinction between the difference between starting a school and transitioning is a helpful one, because the starting the school, you've got all this energy of a new endeavor, something new being created, something different. But then when you're trying to transition one, you have so many set patterns, and classical is so all-encompassing, right? It's not just the curriculum. It's also how are we teaching? What do the classrooms look like? How do we treat the kids? All of those sorts of issues. And so it takes a very different sort of leadership of deciding what piece are we going to work on over the next few months. And then what's the next piece after that? What's the next piece after that?
Oh, I think it would be a lot easier to start one than to transition one.
I think so too, because
but we've seen them transition.
Oh, successfully, yes. But
definitely.
But it's hard work.
Definitely.
And to know that it can be done. We're all coming from a background where we've done what is even more even harder than that. Starting from pure scratch on some things. Once you've done that, you know what's possible, and you realize it's not as hard as everybody thinks it is, and you've got to convince people that it is.
You do have to convince people, though, and I think many times with an administrator who is frightened, who wants to do this, but they sort of are a little bit, intrepid. They step into it. They say, "I'm going to do it." One of the things to encourage them is to say, when you have that parent across the desk from you, and that parent says, how is classical education different from what we have been doing, from the progressive everything? And you just confidently say to them, well, we turn from technology to real paper, real pencils, and real books. I have had parents sit across the desk and just say, I love this. I want this. And you just, that administrator needs to confidently just put it out there, because parents want this good thing. But they sometimes will say, I couldn't put it into words. I didn't know what it was. But that's
such an interesting nugget, because you're just giving them something very, very tangible.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really true.
Yeah. And the world is spinning around them and everything. There are screens everywhere. And you just say that. And they say, yes, I'm coming along with you.
which is not really a specifically classical thing.
No.
It's just a traditional thing, but it is part of what we do.
It's the beginning.
Yeah, right.
It's the beginning. And then with your teachers, you walk them in bit by bit. This is why the classical teacher is so great. You use that in your staff meetings, have them read just one article. You discuss it once a month. They step in more and more. We always say that classical education will change you as a person. And, I remember that 5th grade teacher coming into my classroom, coming into my office mid-year. I get it, Mrs. Becker. What? What is it? I need to forget everything I learned in college. I'm like, yes, you're on the right path. Only because of the progressive mindset, right? So bit by bit, and that's the Memoria thing, right? We do a little bit at a time for a lot in the long run. We do 4 novels a year, little bit at a time. We go deep, deep, deep. In the end, we have a lot. And we do that with our teachers too. We pour in bit by bit by bit. By the end of the year, I'm a changed person. I want to read different books. I'm interested in other things. We become different people.
Well, and isn't that really the greatest enemy of what we're trying to do? Is this hidebound conventionality that we have in education? I mean, they always portray themselves as these sort of revolutionary progressives in ed schools, when in fact they're exactly the opposite, and they're just propounding this old system that is encrusted with barnacles and it can't get anywhere. And
which is what people would say about classical education,
really,
encrusted in barnacles.
But it's
check under your car, Mark, and see if you got some barnacles down there.
Barnacles in my car. That would be interesting. But no, there is that. It's a mentality that this is the way you have to do it because that's what the authorities say we have to do, and that's what my teachers college experience told me to do. And it's all about protocols, and it's all about these dumb things that don't help anybody, and many of which are just simply harmful. Mm-hmm. And people don't know that.
Mm-hmm. I was in a recent meeting with our rep from one of the major publishing companies that we buy books from. And she just innocently across the table asked me what I thought about the science of reading. And I feel like I just went off on her.
That's what I do when I hear that.
It's phonics. It's just phonics. I was just like going off, and she just was like, okay. There's nothing new about the science of reading. We're calling it.
They have
it's
to
a
admit,
new name.
They have to admit that we were right all along.
But they can't.
But they
can't
utter the word phonics. It's
That's
terrible.
right. It's ridiculous.
Yes.
So maybe to conclude, right, if we're talking about in this transition, trying to help people along bit by bit, what are books that each of you would recommend to a teacher or an administrator? Before
we go there, can I make one other point? Is that if you are a school that's transitioning, or even a new startup school, or even a homeschool group that decides we want to have a cottage school, you have to be willing to say goodbye to some people. There are going to be people who think they're bought in, but they never buy in. And that goes for teachers and parents. You could possibly lose some families because they don't want what you're offering. But you have to, as an administrator, you really do have to just stand firm, and you have to know what you're doing, why you're doing it, and that was the thing about Cheryl. She was so adamant and so convinced about what she was doing. It didn't matter what anybody said to her, what any teacher said, what any parent said. She stuck to her guns. I'm not saying she wasn't willing to listen, and she was willing to make change. I mean, we saw lots of change as she grew also, but she knew the basic tenets of what she was doing and stuck to it. And that's what you've got to be willing to let some people go. And that's hard. Yes. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Yes.
But that goes really well along with my question, because, in asking them to read certain things, in essence, you're prepping some self-selection for people to read this and say, I don't want this. This isn't the kind of education that I think is the best for children. Mm-hmm. So are there any that come to mind?
Well, of course, we always talk about climbing Parnassus, right? Although I think that a person first stepping into classical education might be a little lost there. Mm-hmm. And so we need to, that's why I say we start them out small. I've been surprised by teachers you assume that a teacher will like to read. It's not always so if they have not had a good education, right? So you can't read the great things until you read the good things. And so we start with little articles from classical teacher. We step them in bit by bit. Then we go a little deeper. Maybe our second year into transition, they're ready to read Climbing Parnassus because they've got a base. They need to know to even understand that thought process of what Tracy Simmons is saying. How do I even think that way? And so I think that is something that we do need to be careful of. And I've noticed it a lot visiting schools. We get used to this. We get used to all of these things that we talk about. You walk into a school that's transitioning, they're babies. They are not aware of all these things. And so we need to be careful that we start where we should in walking teachers in.
Can I tell you my test for a good school? Is you walk into the teacher's room and you sit down and you listen to what they're talking about. Because if you do that here, they're in there arguing about Moby Dick or they're talking about what they're teaching.
The curriculum. And I think your point is excellent. I do think we just throw out books that have really, and I throw out Climbing Parnassus because it's the first book Cheryl gave to me to read, but I had already.
But you're at a point already.
I was at that point because I had been mentored by her. I was, as my children were students in her school. So you're right.
That's a great caution for administrators who have maybe spent a couple of years trying to decide, am I going to do this? Then they decide to do it. And you have to realize your teachers haven't been doing that the past couple of years.
Exactly right.
And the best way to just stop any interest they have is to overwhelm them, right?
You're right.
We want them inspired. We want them excited. We want them to look forward to this great thing that they're doing. So we can't overwhelm them.
Yeah.
On that note, and that goes with the point you made too, is just you could read the curriculum together. We did that.
Yes,
we took like all of the read alouds in 3rd through 6th grade. We at Memoria Press would read one of those and go to dinner and discuss it.
That was the genesis of our book club. Now we're reading War and Peace. So see how far we've come.
See where we've come, see where teachers can get to. But articles are great. For me, I love that 7 Myths.
Oh, that was a great book.
By Daisy
Christodoulou. Yeah.
I love that book. And I think that is really helpful for transitioning schools if they do it together, myth by myth, just because it points out this is why we're doing this, because of all of these problems that she very clearly enunciates, I think, in that book.
Yeah, so and we should remind listeners that we've got articles, we've got because they're going to need outside help. They cannot. Most of them cannot do this by themselves. Let's say have somebody in there who really knows their stuff. So we've got articles, we've got video, really great videos coming out now. We've got speakers. I mean, that's a lot of what I do. Yes. I'm leaving next week to go speak to a school, and to have somebody come in and articulate this to people that maybe nobody there can do. So we do have resources to.
Yeah. And I think because of where I'm located in the West, far from Louisville, we have all of these schools that can't make it here. It's very expensive. So when we have regional trainings and getting those schools and spending 2 days going through all of the curriculum, then a teacher can start the school year prepared and excited.
And
it may
feel
be
equipped.
new to me, but I have this. I like this. I think our lesson plans are the greatest thing because we can say to a teacher, we can make your life better. You do not always have to stress about what you're going to do. And at the end of the day, you've taught hard, you've enjoyed your teaching, you've been prepared, and you can go home and love your family.
And you've gotten to check off all those boxes.
Yep, boxes are great for checking, aren't they?
Well, and Kathy, I think that brings up another point. I've been trying to wrap this up for a while, but that the teachers need time to prepare. And so one of the best things that an administrator could do if they're changing curriculum is get those books in the teacher's hands before the school year's over.
Yes.
Don't wait till August to get those books in their hands.
That is a big problem.
Because that happens a lot. It happens more than you would think.
And stop thinking that you need to reinvent the wheel every time you do a lesson. Okay. The way I wrote my logic books, the way Cheryl wrote the Latin books, is your lesson plan is there. You just have to step through it and learn it. You don't have to invent it. I mean, all these teachers who have to go, I know teachers and they'll be at our family's parties or something. Well, I've got to go home and do lesson planning. I'm thinking, what do you have a curriculum department for? I mean, isn't that what they're supposed to be doing? Aren't they supposed to give you lessons? We have been educating for thousands of years, and you don't have a lesson plan for your class tomorrow? I don't get it. Yeah.
Oh, dear.
Well, on that note, if you are interested in getting your institution or your school to transition to classical education, reach out. Kathy's name and picture and contact information is on the website.
And also homeschoolers that
want to start schools.
That want to start, yes.
Absolutely. And join us next week for the next episode of Classical Etc. Thank you for watching this episode of Classical Etc. Please consider liking or sharing this video or commenting below to let us know what you thought. This has been Classical Etc. with Memoria Press. We'll see you next time.